There's been a big conversation in this body that actually matches the conversation that's happening around the country right now. If you ask any random person on the street what are the key issues that they're thinking about right now, almost every poll that I've seen for the past several months have said people are concerned about the economy and they're concerned about border security. Just about every poll you've seen everywhere, that's been the 1 and 2. Sometimes border security has been the top issue, sometimes it's been the second issue, but it's been in those top 2 over and over and over again. And it's not just border states, and it's not just Republicans. It's Republicans, Democrats, Independents alike. They see what's happening in the border, and they just want to know what's the plan. Because the news comes out in September that last September was the highest number of border crossings ever in the history of country for any September. Then October was the highest number of illegal crossings of any October. Then November was the highest number of crossings of any November in our nation's history. And then December came, and it was not only the highest number of illegal crossings of any December in our history, it was the highest single month ever for any month in our history. And typically December is a lower month, but instead it was the highest month in our history with the highest single day in our history and an average of 10,000 people a day that illegally crossed the border. Right at 300,000 people in a single month. Just to put that in perspective, if I go during the Obama administration, what we had in December and November exceeded any single year in the Obama administration. Just those 2 months. During the early days of the Obama administration, we had 21,000 people a year that requested asylum. 21,000 people a year that requested asylum on our southern border. We had that in 2 days in December. That's how things have shifted. That's why this is not a partisan issue. This is a national issue. People understand the national security implications of this, that we literally have thousands of people crossing the border every day, and we have no idea where they are. They cross the border, and I can tell you quickly how. They cross somewhere in the desert in Arizona, either through a gap that's been cut in the fence or in areas where there is a gap at the fence and they just go around it. They're given a couple different options. One is a parole authority called 236 parole. You're just released in the country, take off. There's another one called a notice to appear. You'll hear the common term NTA. They're saying there's just so many people crossing right now, we don't have time to be able to go through all the paperwork, so we're going to give you a piece of paper that says show up at an ICE office, and you can literally go anywhere you want to go in the country to do this. Go anywhere you want to be able to go in the country, hand them this piece of paper and turn yourself in, and then get a hearing date set after that. Maybe shocking to everyone, not many people are actually showing up at ICE offices and turning themselves in. They're just disappearing into the country by the hundreds of thousands, month after month. In addition to that, if you come to our ports of entry and you're going to do an orderly entry, well, that's shifted actually. Since earlier this year, this administration has started using a parole authority that is termed humanitarian parole, but they're using it in a way no administration has ever used humanitarian parole in the history of the country. You see, earlier this year, actually I should say now last year, now it's January, earlier last year, this administration announced to the world that if you will tell us ahead of time that you're coming, when you come to a port of entry, we will give you a work permit when you arrive, that day. So 1,500 people a day come to their appointment at the port of entry from all over the world. They show up, they're given a parole document called 212D, and they're given a work permit that day and released into the country. We've just asked the question, how does that slow down immigration across the country? Because parole is actually not a status. Parole is actually listed in our law as a non-status, is that you're actually here, but humanitarian parole was designed for a situation like what we had in Ukraine, or it was designed for a situation where an individual has a funeral that they've got to get to, but in their country it takes too long to get a visa and they couldn't get to the funeral, and so they get humanitarian parole to be able to come in and get to that funeral. It's not designed to say, y'all come. It's not designed to be anyone from anywhere in the world just show up and I'm going to hand you a work permit when you get here and release you into the country at 1,500 people a day. Americans see this. This doesn't make sense to people. They just want to know, what are we going to do to get order where there's chaos? They're not asking for a political solution. They're just asking for a solution. This shouldn't be something that we don't address here. For 2.5 months now, my colleague Senator Murphy, my colleague Senator Sinema, and a whole bunch of folks are around the three of us that are other colleagues in this body and their staff have worked together to try to get to a solution of how can we address this in a bipartisan way. This body requires bipartisan solutions. We've got to have 60. So we've got to work on hard issues. I would tell you the House of Representatives did a very good bill called H.R. 2 that addressed a lot of issues dealing with immigration. But unfortunately, the House didn't have any Democrats on board. In fact, they didn't even have all Republicans on board that particular bill. They passed a very comprehensive set of solutions to be able to deal with border security. That's what they passed. This body's not passed anything to be able to respond. The House noticed a long time ago this is something that needs to be addressed. This body has been allergic to working on how to be able to solve the border crisis. So for the last 2.5 months, we've met in a bipartisan way to hammer out, how do we solve this? Because it can't be ignored. The worst case scenario is for Americans to say, who's going to do something, and for this body to say, not it. We got to come to some solutions. Some of the issues are obvious. The vast majority of people coming across the border will say, I have fear in my country because the cartels have told them if you say the magic word, you'll be released in the country. Because that puts you on a track for asylum, when actually what it does is it puts you into a 10-year backlog of claims that are out there, and people know if I cross the border and just make a statement, I can be in the United States for the next 10 years. It's the greatest country in the world. There's billions of people that would like to be able to be here. That's a pretty easy entry, to be able to just come across, say the secret word, and you're in. We got to be able to resolve that. We as a nation should be able to filter through the people that are coming and to identify who actually qualifies for asylum and who is just wanting to come to be a part of the greatest nation in the world. If you want to just come for economic reasons, there's a way to be able to do that, to go through the legal process. We allow about 1 million people a year to legally naturalize into our country. We're one of the most generous countries in the world in our legal naturalization process. We should continue to be able to do that, as we have for decades and decades. But for people that want to game the system, we are lawmakers. Why would we ignore people that are abusing the law? If we ignore the abuse of the law, what are we doing making law if it's not going to actually be enforced? So let's get back to identifying those who actually qualify for asylum, and those who are just gaming the system, turn them back around and to say, go through the legal processes. Don't run through the desert. Don't swim across the river. Don't come to a border agent and lie to them. Let's figure out a legal way to be able to address legal immigration and turn around illegal migration. We should be able to solve this issue. It's obvious to everybody. We should be able to bring immediate consequences when someone's actually violated our law. Currently, someone crosses in the border, it may be 10 years before it's addressed. If we can't deal with immediate consequences, as I've heard over and over again from parents and from every individual, a delayed consequence is a non-consequence. So if the consequence is delayed 10 years, that's not really a consequence, and everyone knows it. So we've got to be able to have immediate consequences. And we've got to have solutions to this issue about just paroling 1,500 random people from anywhere in the world. If the standard to get into America is literally just fill out a form and tell them that you're coming first and you're released into the country with a work permit and a non-status of parole, literally that is an executive authority that could be taken away at any moment, literally. Next president comes in, they could waive every single parolee on the first day and it'd be entirely legal because parole is not a status, it's just a release into the country. If we can't figure out how to be able to solve that, when the mayors of Chicago and of New York and of Denver are saying, why is this administration releasing people into the country between ports of entry in this other parole process or an NTA with no work permit and just releasing them by the hundreds of thousands? Why is this happening? If we can't answer that question, then we need to be able to sit down at the table until we do. The Senate's where hard things get worked out. This is a hard thing. This is something that's not been resolved in more than 30 years. I understand we have differences of opinion. So does America, except in this one issue. They want this solved. America wants a resolution on this. So I encourage us as a body to keep negotiating, keep working at it. We're not going to solve everything. We never do. But we need to solve as much as we can because this is one of the biggest issues in the country. And I would tell you, this is one of our greatest threats. In the past year, in the flood of people crossing our border, tens of thousands of people that came across our border, this administration declared as a national security risk. The term they use is special interest alien. Tens of thousands of people that crossed were given that designation, special interest alien, and then released into the country. We have no idea where they are. These were identified at the border as a national security risk, but because we're not managing our border and we're overrun with capacity, the option they have is releasing them. For the sake of our nation's national security and our future, let's actually go back to following the law. Let's actually create a process where when we pass law, we expect it to actually be enforced and to be done. We can do a hard thing. That's our job. That I yield the floor.
Senator from North Carolina.
Madam President, before the senator from Oklahoma leaves, I was wondering if he would yield for a question.
Yes, I would.
Senator Lankford, you've done an extraordinary job of negotiating what I think is going to be a successful compromise that's going to get support from Republicans and Democrats. But as you were going through this work and the years that you've spent studying this issue as a ranking member and chair in a committee of jurisdiction, I've got to believe you've looked at, let's say, Canada, for example. There are a lot of people that think what Senator Lankford and those of us who are trying to support Senator Lankford are being draconian and being out of step with the Western world. But Senator Lankford, could you just briefly describe how what we're trying to do compares to, say, our partner to the north, Canada, their laws?
I don't run into many people that call the Canadians extreme. Not a derogatory statement towards the Canadians, but they have a pretty consistent system on it. If you cross from the United States into Canada and ask for asylum, they would first ask you, did you cross through the United States of America before you came into Canada? And if your answer was yes, they would turn you around and immediately return you back to the United States. And to say, you can't request asylum here in Canada if you haven't requested asylum in the places you've already traveled through. That's the law in Canada.
So, Madam President, may I ask one follow-up?
Senator from North Carolina.
So, Senator Lankford, isn't it true that tens of thousands of people who cross our borders today have not taken and who may ultimately request asylum, have looked past an opportunity to safely relocate in the country they're seeking asylum from, likely transited to another country where they could have declared of asylum, and in some cases passed through 4 or 5 or 6 different safe jurisdictions before they make the dangerous trip through Mexico, cross the Rio Grande border, and present themselves to border. Is that an accurate assessment of what hundreds of thousands of people have done during the Trump administration?
Senator Tillis, that is correct, that during the past several administrations, we have millions of people that have actually crossed across our border, have either never requested asylum. At the border, they declared they were going to ask for asylum, but literally never did, never filled out the paperwork, never even tried because they knew they weren't eligible, or they traveled through multiple countries on the way, never requested asylum because they wanted to come to America, which I don't blame them. It's the greatest country in the world. But that's not what asylum is. Asylum means I have fear in my entire country. There is no safe place in my country, so I fled to the next safe place. That's what the international definition of asylum is.
Well, I thank Senator Lankford through the chair, and then Madam President, I want to spend a few minutes on this subject as well. This is, we're reaching a milestone that I think is critically important. Since President Biden has entered office, the number of encounters at the border, 8 million. 8 million since President Biden entered office. That population exceeds the population of 30 U.S. states, the population of 30 individual U.S. states. That's the number we're talking about here. And ladies and gentlemen, a lot of them are the people that we just described. Of course the United States wants to be a haven for people who are suffering, or fearing for their life, suffering from oppression. But the goal of asylum is to get them immediately out of that dangerous situation, not to suddenly decide that I want to go through 2 or 3 or 4 other jurisdictions, because what I ultimately want to do is get to the United States. They are demeaning and devaluing the concept of asylum, and the problem is they're getting those who want to come here, and we should take it as a compliment that they want to come to the United States, but they're elbowing out and sapping the capacity for the United States to make absolutely certain that people who have a legitimate case for asylum are even being heard. I wonder about how many thousands of people who desperately need to get to the United States, it's their only option, are not getting there because we're focused on this population. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to do something. This is dangerous. And you know, for a time, conservatives were really in the wilderness, being viewed as inhuman, insensitive, saying that we have to have an orderly border process. I've been saying that. I'm also somebody who thinks that we should probably legally immigrate another 250,000, 500,000 more than we do already. We immigrate about 1 million. Let me tell you the other problem we have here that's inherently unfair. I already talked about people who legitimately should be given asylum. Probably not, because we don't know who they are. We're dealing with a flood of 300,000 in the month of December alone. Of course, there are going to be collateral damage in the form of people who want asylum. But now the American people are waking up to it. You know, there was a time when it was purely a shirts and skins, blue jersey Democrat, red jersey Republican argument. It's not the case anymore. The American people expect this administration to do something. And I'm glad. And I'm also glad that we have James Lankford at the tip of the spear negotiating on behalf of Republicans. He's negotiated. I'm a part of the working group. I've seen progress. He's negotiated something that I think is important. We cannot miss this opportunity. The stakes are too high. And the American people agree. Nearly half of those who responded to this poll, which was an even distribution ideologically speaking, nearly half of them think we have an emergency at the border. They're right. I've been there several times. They are right. People are dying. Cartels are making nearly $1 billion a year charging tolls to come across the border. And if you try to cross the border without an armband or recognition that you paid a cartel, you are likely going to die. Or you're going to get one more chance before you get beaten up. That happens every day at the border, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not exaggerating. I've been there. I've seen it. I've heard the stories. Fortunately now, we have a majority of Americans that expect this administration to come to the table and negotiate in good faith with conservatives and people like me who have negotiated several bipartisan deals to solve this problem. And if any Democrats are concerned with how far the negotiations are going, I don't think that they need to. This is not a political loser for people who are concerned with voting on a bipartisan compromise. In fact, it's politically smart. So at the end of the day, I hope political advisors and everybody that's up for election next year know, you know what, you don't even need political courage to do the right thing here, because the good policy of border security is also good politics for the overwhelming majority of people that need to vote for this bill. Now, we're going to have 30 or 40 people on this side, or not 30 or 40, I think we'll probably have 25 or 30 members in this body that won't vote for it. Some will be because it didn't go too far. The others will be it didn't go far enough. Some of them are because they're in cycle. It's very difficult to explain. I get that. But we need about 70 votes coming out of this chamber to create the momentum to get it done in the House. And I'm going to be one of those 70 votes. But I also want the American people to not only wake up to the reality that people are abusing our system, they're taking our attention away from people that we should desperately find a path to getting to the United States. And they're also jumping line. And that's what I'll leave with you. How angry do you all get? Any of y'all, I love going to a good sporting event or a good comedy show. You get there early sometimes because you want to get a good seat if it's general admission. How angry do you get if you're standing in line for hours and all of a sudden somebody jumps in front of you? Well, imagine if you've been waiting years, more than a decade, to legally follow the process to be one of those million people a year that get citizenship. When you see millions of them coming across the border every year breaking line. These people that are working hard, obeying our laws, respecting it, doing it by the book, they're breaking line. And it's actually elongating the time for them to get into this country. It's unfair at every level, and it's unsafe. And the only people who are loving the stalemate that we have in this nation today are the cartels, who are charging from $5,000 to $50,000 a person to get you across the border. Not everybody has $5,000 though. So you know what they do? They say, well, you don't have to pay, but once you get across the border, you're going to participate in criminal enterprises until we think your debt is done. That's not an exaggeration either. Talk to law enforcement, talk to people in these communities. These cartels are like a cancer metastasizing through illegally present communities, exploiting them and causing some people who may not have had a criminal record in the country of their origin to become criminals here. There are a million different reasons why we need to get this border compromise done. And Madam President, I hope this Congress is the Congress where people set aside politics, do the right thing, make this country safer, and show respect for people trying to come to this country legally by making sure that their place in line is reserved. Thank you, Madam President.